This story comes from a passenger who swears what he saw on a luxury cruise ship wasn't possible. A crew member who looked identical to someone in brochures from decades ago. Same smile, same uniform, same name. What started as curiosity turned into a nightmare that still haunts him. These are said to be true encounters, cross-checked from real posts and accounts. Dim the lights. You're listening to Midnight Outcry. Story 1. I never believed a smile could feel wrong until I saw his. It was the kind of smile that didn't belong to a living person, more like something practiced so many times it became permanent. I still see it when I close my eyes. The crisp uniform, polished shoes, and that frozen grin that hadn't changed in decades. Last summer, I booked a cruise for my girlfriend Megan and me. It was supposed to be a celebration, her finishing her medical residency and me finally landing a big design contract. We wanted peace, something quiet before life sped up again. So we chose the Ocean Majesty, an old luxury liner that had recently been restored to its original glory. From the moment we stepped aboard, something about the ship felt off. It looked stunning on the surface, gleaming decks, golden chandeliers, and fresh white paint, but underneath the beauty, there was an unnatural stillness. The kind that makes you lower your voice without knowing why. He was the first crew member I noticed. Tall, perfectly groomed, maybe late 40s, with a name tag that read, Elias Guest Services. He stood by the gangway, greeting passengers, his posture straight as a ruler, his expression locked in that same polished smile. When he shook my hand, his grip was firmer than it needed to be. "Welcome aboard, sir," he said, voice calm and smooth. "We hope your voyage with us will be timeless." The way he said that last word, as if he was weighing it carefully, stayed in my head long after we walked away. Our cabin was small but beautiful, with white drapes fluttering against the window and the faint sound of the ocean outside. That first evening felt perfect. The sound of waves against the hull, Megan laughing beside me, it almost felt like nothing could go wrong. While unpacking, Megan found an old cruise brochure tucked into the vanity drawer. The paper was yellowed, corners curled. Across the top, it said Ocean Majesty, Experience a Voyage Beyond Time, and there was a picture of the ship's original crew standing on the same grand staircase we had passed earlier that day. My eyes immediately landed on one face, Elias, the same smile, the same jawline, even the same tiny scar under his chin. "Megan," I said quietly, "look at this." She leaned closer and frowned. "No way. This is from... What year is that?" I turned the page over. 1983. She zoomed in with her phone camera. "That's him." Exactly him. I laughed nervously. Maybe his father worked here too? Or it's some kind of promotional reuse? But even as I said it, my stomach felt hollow. The photo didn't look vintage. It looked freshly printed, like it had been taken yesterday. That night, the dining room buzzed with soft piano music and polite chatter. The air smelled of salt and perfume. The passengers were friendly, but there was something muted about the atmosphere. Every few minutes I caught sight of Elias moving between tables, greeting guests, repeating the same words with that fixed, mechanical smile. I couldn't stop watching him. At one point, Megan leaned over and whispered, "He's by the mirror. Don't turn too fast." I glanced to the side, pretending to reach for my glass. Elias was standing near the long decorative mirror at the far wall, not looking at the guests, but staring into his reflection. His lips moved slightly, like he was whispering something to himself or someone else. When his eyes met mine through the mirror, he smiled again. I felt a sharp chill crawl up my spine. Back in our cabin later that night, a low hum filled the air as the ship's announcement system crackled on. "Attention all guests. Please remain in your cabins after midnight for scheduled maintenance. Thank you." Megan joked that it was probably cleaning staff doing deck work, but I'd been on other cruises before, and none had ever asked passengers to stay inside. I tried to shake it off. Around 12:40 a.m., I stepped onto the balcony for some air. The sea was black and endless. The horizon blurred into mist. Movement caught my eye on the lower deck. Elias was there, walking slowly along the railing. His uniform clung to him, soaked through as if he'd been standing in rain, though the sky above was clear. He stopped every few feet, looking down at the water. In his hand was something metallic, looked like a ring of keys. He whispered something I couldn't hear, then threw them overboard. He turned slightly, and in the pale deck light his face looked drained of color, almost translucent. For a second I thought he saw me watching, but his eyes passed right over me like I wasn't there at all. I stepped back inside, heart pounding. Megan was half asleep, mumbling that I was overthinking. But even then, I knew what I'd seen wasn't normal. There was something ancient about the way he moved, something heavy behind his calm. The next morning, the sun was bright, but the air on the ship still felt cold. We stopped at the cafe on the lower deck, and while Megan ordered coffee, I asked the barista casually, "Hey, that guy Elias, he's in guest services, right?" Her smile froze. "I'm sorry, sir. I don't think there's anyone working here by that name." I frowned. "I met him when we boarded yesterday." She hesitated, lowering her voice. "You're not the first passenger to ask." Then she turned away quickly, pretending to refill cups, leaving me standing there with a chill creeping down my neck. After breakfast, Megan and I went exploring near the crew quarters. The walls there were older, the lighting dimmer. Near a stairwell, we found a board listing all active staff, names printed neatly under each department. No Elias, but beneath it hung a small wooden plaque covered in dust. The metal tag read, "In memory of our lost crew, 1983. My eyes scanned the list of names until they stopped on one. Elias Carter, guest services, lost at sea. Body never recovered. The floor beneath me thrummed gently, deep and steady, like a heartbeat buried somewhere under the ship. My hands went cold as a single thought formed in my head. Last night, when Elias threw those keys into the sea, he wasn't letting something go, he was calling it back. If anyone listening has ever been on that ship or seen a man who looks like him, you might want to subscribe, because what happened next still doesn't make sense to me. By the second night, the ship didn't feel like a vacation anymore. It felt like a place suspended between two times. I tried to convince myself that the plaque didn't mean anything. Ships had accidents, and names got reused. Maybe there was a memorial for a man who died years ago, and another crew member just happened to share the same name. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. Megan didn't want to talk about it. She said I was feeding my paranoia, so I tried to focus on the normal things. The buffet, the pool deck, the shows. But every time I looked around, I caught glimpses of him. Elias, standing at the edge of a crowd, watching, never blinking, never aging. That evening, during the captain's dinner, the lights flickered twice. Just 2 short blinks, but enough for the entire dining hall to gasp and then laugh it off. When the lights came back, Elias was suddenly standing near our table, smiling as if nothing had happened. "Everything all right?" I asked before I could stop myself. He tilted his head slightly. "Perfectly fine, sir. We just had a small realignment." The way he said it made my skin crawl. After dinner, I couldn't shake the tension in my chest. I told Megan I needed to stretch my legs, but really, I just wanted to see if I could find where the crew stayed. The hallways grew narrower as I descended the lower decks. The air smelled of old paint and salt, and the humming of the engines felt louder here, like the heartbeat I'd felt earlier was closer. At the end of one corridor, I found a maintenance door propped slightly open. Inside, a dim bulb flickered over a collection of old photographs taped to the wall. My stomach dropped when I realized what they were. Crew photos, dating back decades. In every single one of them, Elias was there. Sometimes younger, sometimes older, but always with that same smile. In one picture from the 1990s, he stood beside a group of new hires, holding a champagne glass. In another from 2008, he was alone in front of the ship's ballroom. The backgrounds changed, the faces around him aged and vanished. But he remained constant. A voice behind me made me jump. "You shouldn't be here." I turned fast. An older man in a maintenance jumpsuit was standing in the doorway. His face was tired, eyes darting nervously behind me like he expected someone else to be there. I was just looking for guest services," I stammered. He sighed and motioned for me to step out. "You won't find help down here, trust me. Some doors are better left closed." Before I could ask what he meant, he added quietly, "You've seen him, haven't you? The smiling one." I froze. He nodded slowly. "Elias. He's been greeting passengers longer than any of us. The old crew used to say he drowned during that storm in '83. But sometimes, the sea doesn't let go. It keeps what it likes." He leaned closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. "If he talks to you again, don't take anything from him. Not a drink, not a token, not a word of promise. That's how he binds people." Before I could respond, a metallic clang echoed from further down the hall, and the man's eyes went wide. "Go," he hissed. "He's coming!" I ran. My footsteps echoed through the metal hallways as the ship seemed to hum louder, almost alive. When I reached our cabin, Megan was standing by the mirror, pale and shaking. "What's wrong?" I asked, breathless. She didn't answer at first. Then she turned slowly toward me, and I saw her reflection move half a second later. "I saw him," she whispered. "He came to the door while you were gone, said you asked him to bring something. He left this." In her trembling hand was an old-fashioned brass key. The tag read, "Deck Zero Archive Room." The lights flickered again, and for the briefest second I thought I heard faint footsteps in the hallway, measured, deliberate, like someone pacing right outside our door. I took the key from her hand, and even through the metal, it felt cold, colder than anything should be at room temperature. Megan wanted to throw it overboard immediately, but some part of me needed to know what it opened. Maybe it would prove there was a logical explanation, something that could make sense of all this. At 1:00 a.m., while the ship rocked gently under the moonlight, I found myself standing at the end of the lowest hallway, key in hand, facing a rusted metal door marked Archive Room. When the key turned, the lock gave with a sound that didn't belong in a modern ship. It wasn't a click, it was a sigh. I stepped inside. The room smelled of salt, dust, and something faintly sweet, like decaying flowers. Dozens of old passenger manifests lined the walls, stacked in tall filing cabinets. But what froze me wasn't the papers. It was the mirrors. There were mirrors everywhere, lining the walls, the ceiling, even the floor in some spots, each reflecting countless versions of me, standing in a dim, endless space. And in one of those reflections, behind me, Elias was smiling. Not in the real room, only in the reflection. He raised his hand and motioned for me to turn around. I couldn't. Every nerve in my body screamed to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Then, slowly, I felt a hand rest on my shoulder, cold, wet, and in a calm whisper that sounded like it came from inside my skull, Elias said, "Time doesn't move forward here, it circles." The lights went out. When the lights came back on, I was standing in the middle of the archive room, gasping for air like I'd been underwater. The mirrors were gone. Only the faint smell of salt lingered in the air, and the walls were now lined with sealed cabinets that looked newer than before. My hands were trembling so badly I almost dropped the key. I stumbled back into the hallway, clutching the rail to steady myself. Everything felt wrong. The metal floor hummed louder, the walls seemed narrower, and the lights along the ceiling buzzed like trapped insects. When I reached the nearest elevator, its digital display flickered between numbers that didn't exist. Deck 8, Deck 9, Deck 0, Deck 10, then nothing. I pressed the button for our floor anyway. The doors closed. For a few seconds, the elevator just sat there. Then, it started to move, but not smoothly. It jerked once, then twice, then began descending with a slow, steady hum that sounded too deep to belong to any machinery. When the doors opened again, it wasn't our deck. The hallway beyond was dark, lined with peeling wallpaper and old brass fixtures. It looked like something out of a different decade, maybe the 1970s. My reflection in the elevator's mirrored wall looked faint, slightly delayed, as if I were watching a memory of myself instead of the real thing. There was a faint sound of a record player somewhere down the corridor, soft music, distorted by distance. I followed it, heart pounding. Halfway down the hall, I saw a shadow move past the light from a cabin doorway. Someone was inside. I should have turned back, but instead, I looked in. The room was lit by a single lamp. An old woman sat at a vanity table, brushing her hair. Her reflection in the mirror was young, barely 20. When she turned to face me, her voice came from the reflection, not her real mouth. "He doesn't age," she said softly. "He just trades places." I stepped back, nearly tripping over the doorframe. The woman's body turned toward me now, but her reflection stayed frozen, smiling with eyes that didn't blink. "He found you," she whispered. "He only needs one at a time." A loud metallic groan echoed through the hallway, deep and resonant like the ship itself was twisting. Lights flickered again, and when they came back, the room was empty. The vanity, the lamp, the woman, gone. Only the faint imprint of a chair remained in the carpet. I ran. I didn't even know where I was going, just away from that deck. Eventually, I found a stairwell that led upward, and when I burst out into the main lounge, everything looked normal again. Passengers were laughing. The music was upbeat. The world had reset. But when I found Megan sitting near the bar, she didn't look relieved to see me. She looked confused. "Do I know you?" she asked. My stomach dropped. "Megan, it's me." She frowned, eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. "Sir, please don't. My husband will be back in a minute." Before I could respond, a man stepped up beside her. He looked exactly like me, but older. His hair was shorter, his posture calmer, his voice eerily familiar. "Everything okay here?" he asked, placing a hand on her shoulder. Megan smiled at him the way she used to smile at me. I felt like I was falling. The room began to tilt, slightly at first, then harder, as if the whole ship had caught a wave no one else could feel. Glasses slid off tables. The lights dimmed. And when I looked toward the mirrored wall behind the bar, I saw Elias standing there. Not in the room, just in the reflection, his face framed between mine and the older version of me. He smiled that same impossible smile and raised his glass in a silent toast. I backed away, my hands shaking. "What are you doing?" I shouted, but no one looked at me. The passengers continued laughing, drinking, moving around me like I wasn't even there. Then I realized why. In every reflection, I was gone. The older version of me was there, but my own reflection had vanished completely. I ran toward the nearest hallway, my mind spinning, my breath catching in my throat. The air grew colder as I reached the stairwell again, frost forming along the railing. Every sound, the chatter, the footsteps, the laughter, faded into a low, distant hum. And then, faintly through the hum of the ship, I heard Elias's voice again, calm and patient. "Time doesn't move forward here, it circles." I looked down, and the brass key was in my hand again, though I'd left it behind in the archive room. Only this time, the tag didn't say Deck 0. It said Cabin 47, Elias. I don't remember walking to Cabin 47. I just remember standing in front of it, key in hand, listening to the faint sound of the ocean through the steel walls. The corridor was empty. The lights above flickered in and out, casting my shadow across the carpet like it was trying to crawl ahead of me. The door looked newer than the rest. Smooth brass handle, polished wood, no scratches. But the number plate wasn't printed like the others. It was carved, uneven, as if done by hand. 47. When I slid the key in, it turned with no resistance. The air that came out of the room was colder than anything I'd ever felt on a ship. Not the kind of cold that makes you shiver, but the kind that makes your breath sound louder, sharper, like the air itself has weight. Inside, the lights hummed faintly, but most of the cabin was in shadow. I expected luggage, beds, maybe some crew equipment. Instead, there was only a single mirror hanging on the far wall, and in that mirror, someone was already standing. It was me, but not like before. My reflection was soaked, hair matted, eyes wide with terror. He looked like he'd drowned. Then I realized he was mouthing something. I leaned closer, trying to read his lips. 3 words, over and over. He takes turns. Behind me, the door clicked shut. The sound was soft, but it felt final. I spun around, but no one was there. Only the faint vibration of the engines beneath the floor and the dim hum of the lights. When I turned back, Elias was standing beside my reflection. "Curious creatures, aren't we?" he said, voice calm and pleasant. "Always needing to know who came before us." I tried to speak, but my throat was dry. "What are you?" he smiled. "I'm what keeps the ship moving." He stepped closer, not through the mirror, but toward it. His reflection didn't follow. Instead, my reflection began to change, shifting between faces. Old, young, male, female. Dozens of them, flickering like film frames from different eras. Crew members, passengers, all frozen mid-expression, all smiling that same hollow smile. "You think a vessel this large just carries people," Elias said softly. "No, it carries time. Every voyage adds a layer, and every decade needs a keeper. When one fades, another takes their place." My voice cracked. "You're saying you?" "I was the first," he interrupted, "and soon you'll be the next." I stumbled back, my shoulder hitting the door. It didn't move. Elias kept walking forward until the space between us felt like it was collapsing. The mirror behind him pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat syncing with mine. "I don't want this," I said. "I didn't ask for this." "Neither did I," he whispered. "But the sea chooses who it remembers." The room trembled. The mirror began to ripple like water. And suddenly, I was no longer standing on solid floor. I was standing on a glass surface, with black water moving just beneath it. I could see shapes below. Faces, reaching hands, drifting bodies suspended in slow motion. Elias extended his hand toward me. "All it takes is one promise, one moment of surrender." Something in me broke then. The fear, the confusion, it all collapsed into something primal. I threw the brass key across the room. It hit the mirror, cracking it down the center. The sound was like a thunderclap underwater. Elias's smile faltered for the first time. The mirror's surface shattered, and behind it was nothing, just open, endless dark water. The room started flooding instantly, freezing water pouring in from invisible seams. I tried to reach the door, but the pressure was too strong. The cold numbed my hands, my legs. The last thing I saw before the water covered my head was Elias, watching calmly as if I were sinking into his reflection instead of drowning. Then, darkness. When I opened my eyes, sunlight was spilling through the curtains of our cabin. Megan was sitting on the bed, reading a brochure, the same one from the start of the trip. She looked up and smiled when she saw me. "Morning, sleepyhead. You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I wanted to tell her everything. The mirrors, the key, the flooding. But when I looked down at my hands, I stopped. They were wrinkled. The kind of wrinkles that come from age, not water. My reflection in the cabin mirror wasn't mine. It was older. My hair gray at the edges, my eyes sunken. And when the intercom chimed overhead, a familiar voice spoke. "Good morning, passengers. This is your crew member, Elias. Breakfast will be served shortly on deck 4. I turned toward the mirror again, and this time, when I smiled, the reflection smiled a split second before I did. For the rest of that day, I tried to convince myself I was dreaming. The world looked the same, but something beneath it didn't feel right. The light through the cabin windows had a faint blue tint, and the air smelled faintly of brine, no matter how many times I washed my hands. Megan didn't notice any of it. She laughed, smiled, talked about breakfast, the excursions, the sunset on the deck that evening. Every time I looked at her, a different kind of dread sank into me. Not because she'd changed, but because I hadn't. Not really. Every reflection I caught, chrome handles, the glass panels, even her sunglasses, showed the older version of me. I could feel time dragging over me like invisible weight, slow and steady. And somewhere in the background of it all, Elias's voice lingered in my mind. The sea remembers. That night, I walked out onto the upper deck while most passengers were asleep. The sky stretched open above me, stars scattered across black water, so still it looked painted. A crew member in uniform stood by the railing. He was young, early 20s maybe, and when he turned, I almost didn't recognize him. Late night? He asked with a polite smile. His name tag said Daniel. I forced a laugh, my throat dry. Yeah, couldn't sleep. He nodded and turned back to the ocean, staring into the waves. It happens to everyone on their first voyage. The ship has a rhythm. You'll feel it eventually. There was something about the way he said that word, rhythm, that made the hair on my neck stand up. He leaned on the railing, eyes fixed on the horizon like he was waiting for something to rise from it. Do you ever get used to it? I asked. He smiled faintly. Used to what? The feeling that this ship doesn't stop. His smile widened just a little too much. It doesn't. A gust of wind rattled the deck chairs, and I swear the ship tilted for a second. When I blinked, Daniel was gone. Only the faint sound of waves remained. I went back inside, heart pounding. The hallways were empty now, the lights dimmed to a sleepy glow. As I passed the crew quarters, I caught a glimpse of movement behind one of the frosted glass doors. A figure stood still in the light. Someone tall, head slightly tilted. Watching, I didn't check. I just kept walking until I reached our cabin. Megan was asleep, one arm draped across the blanket. Her breathing was steady, peaceful. I wanted to hold on to that, to believe that when we docked tomorrow, all of this would be behind us. But when I turned to set my watch on the nightstand, I noticed something that froze me completely. The brochure she'd been reading earlier was still open on the desk. Only this time, it wasn't the glossy modern version we'd picked up before boarding. It was yellowed, faded, edges curled. The cover showed the same ship, but the name was different. The Atlantic Star, Maiden Voyage, 1983. And standing in the center of the smiling crew photo was Elias. I flipped through the pages with shaking hands. Every staff picture was older, different uniforms, different decades, but always the same face, the same smile. And then, near the back, I saw another photograph. Me, wearing the same uniform Elias had worn. Same tag, same hollow smile. The caption beneath it said, Crew Supervisor, Elias Ward, 2025. My breath caught. My fingers went numb. The brochure slipped from my hands and hit the floor softly. The lights flickered once, and the intercom crackled to life. Good evening, passengers, the voice said, calm and familiar. We're pleased to announce calm seas ahead. As always, thank you for sailing with us. But it wasn't Elias's voice anymore. It was mine. I turned toward the cabin mirror, and the reflection staring back wasn't the older version. It was the one I'd seen drowned in the archive room. Water dripping down his face, eyes pale, lips barely moving. He raised a trembling hand and pressed it to the glass from the other side. I didn't. I couldn't move. Then his mouth formed those same 3 words again. He takes turns. The mirror began to fog from within, and behind my reflection, other faces began to emerge. Dozens. Hundreds. Crew and passengers both. All of them smiling through the condensation. I stumbled back toward Megan, shaking her awake, but the bed was empty. Only her necklace lay on the pillow, the pendant rusted and cold. I grabbed it, shouting her name, but the cabin door burst open with a rush of freezing air. The hallway beyond was flooded, ankle deep, waves gently rocking against the carpet. And through that corridor of dark water, Elias walked calmly, uniform soaked, smile unbroken. "It's time," he said softly. "The sea doesn't let go, it just changes faces." He held out his hand. The world tilted. The water rose. And in the reflection on the surface, I saw him, me, us, all merging into one endless, rippling smile. When the ship docked the next morning, everything was back to normal. Passengers disembarked, laughing, taking photos. No one asked about missing people. No one noticed the new crew member greeting them with a steady hand and a polite, familiar smile. His name tag gleamed in the sunlight. Elias. And if you ever step aboard that same cruise line someday, and a friendly crew member greets you with a smile that feels just a little too perfect, just nod politely. Don't shake his hand. Because on that ship, time doesn't move forward, it circles. If you've ever seen a face that felt older than it should be, or a smile that seemed too familiar, hit subscribe. You might want to hear what comes next. And remember, Story 2. I smelled metal and salt as I woke up. Something thick, almost clinging, as if the ship itself were breathing around me, instead of the typical sea air. The engine's buzz was irregular, erratic, and more like a pulse than a steady rumble. I'm Elliot Harris, a 32-year-old Boston-based freelance photographer. After months of working nights and missing anniversaries and birthdays, I made the decision to take this trip. The kind of seclusion that can only be found at sea is what I want. Anxious and introverted, but generally sensible, until that first night. I can still clearly recall the announcement. The exclusive midnight gallery will open tonight at 11 p.m. It wasn't out of the ordinary. Ships always had late-night events. But something about the clipped, resonant tone made me shudder. All art lovers are invited. Curiosity and an odd feeling of dread drove me to leave my cabin at 10:45. The silence in the passageways was uncommon. Typically, music, footfall, and laughter might be heard coming from the lounges. Nothing tonight, only the occasional water leak and the hull's gentle moan. The gallery door was locked when I arrived. "Private viewing crew only" was written on the brass plaque, yet the door was slightly open. I swear I heard someone singing a tune behind it that I didn't recognize. It was lovely and sweet, but it seemed a little strange, like it was coming from underwater. The air changed as I moved in closer, wet and cold. A little whiff of rotting wood and wet canvas. The sound of shoes scuffing on polished flooring took the place of the humming. I looked through the opening. I assumed there was nobody there. Then I noticed it, a freshly painted painting on an easel, but no one was there. The passage I had just passed was portrayed in the scene, but it was darker, distorted, and had shadows where they shouldn't have been. Behind a door in the painting was a figure with a blank face that somehow managed to smile. From behind me, a quiet voice murmured, "Want to see more?" I turned around. The corridor is deserted. However, the door creaked open, beckoning me inside. I felt a strong want to flee. My curiosity, or maybe my stupidity, drove me on. At that moment, I became aware of the dim glow of further paintings along the wall, all of which showed locations that I had not yet been to, or that might not have been. Every frame pulsed a little, like it was breathing. I ought to have gone back. I didn't. I discovered something quite horrifying. When I got closer, the figures in the paintings were moving. Minor changes in posture. Little motions. And every face I recognized was that of passengers I had seen in the dining hall earlier, grinning normally, now depicted here in a distorted sense of reality, their eyes following me. I felt a chill go through me. This was more than just an exhibition of artwork. It was living. I had walked right into it too. I was unable to look away from the painting. The faceless but smiling figure in the hallway moved ever so little, bending closer with each pulse. "It's only paint," my logical mind cried. "It's only art." But my legs shook from the hunch in my belly, the instinct that something was seriously wrong. I moved forward a step. I noticed another painting. I had previously been in a dining hall, but this time the seats were flipped over and the tables were covered in a black, nearly reflecting substance. In the reflections, I could make out folks who weren't there when I passed, and the creatures drew nearer, edged toward me every time I blinked. The smooth, sensual buzzing that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere returned. I considered walking back to my cabin, but the passage behind me was no longer there. The walls were incredibly long and lined with frames that had not been there only a few seconds earlier. I was stuck in an artistic labyrinth. A slight scratching noise reverberated beneath the floor, behind the walls, and throughout the gallery. I listened and froze. A little damp something crawled across the gleaming wood floor. I turned to see the largest canvas in the gallery's center, which had never been there before, and then I heard a whisper. "See yourself in the next frame." With the exception of a tiny figure at the end, it showed a silent, empty cabin corridor that I could swear was mine. A man with a tray of beverages in his hand, his face hidden, wearing a crew uniform. He held up a hand. My feet wouldn't cooperate when I tried to run. Around me, the paintings appeared to breathe and pulse in tune with the ship's hum. Then I saw, not quite correctly, my own reflection in one of the frames. My mouth opened into an unfamiliar smile, and my eyes were lifeless. A wave of panic swept through. I whirled, looking for the way out. The doors behind me now led to nothing but featureless, lifeless walls. I became aware of how the gallery was evolving all around me. The room became more distorted with each step forward. The paintings changed, revealing new spaces and faces, those who had been crew members, passengers, or even complete strangers. Everyone is waiting and staring. I stumbled and hit a canvas with my palm. Like water, the surface rippled. My image looked back at me with a broader smile. "Don't leave me," my own voice murmured from the frame, and from somewhere in the gallery came the sound of childish, distorted, almost melodic laughter. Slowly and deliberately, the faint scuffing of shoes came back. That's when I knew the gallery was alive. It was more than simply art. It was thriving on the attention, the dread, and the souls it imprisoned behind its walls. In the corner, I noticed a tiny door. One of the workers leaned nonchalantly against it. Not one I knew, brand new, immaculately dressed, with a big, hollow smile. His voice was pleasant but hollow as he said, "You shouldn't be here. Come on, take only one sip. See the rest." His tray's amber glow pulsed, luring me in like a moth. The laughing grew, enveloping me in both warmth and cold. I needed to decide. Go ahead and give up, or else you run the risk of being blindsided by a maze with no way out. I paused, gazing at the drink tray the crew member was holding. Like molten sunlight, the amber liquid shimmered strangely. Every instinct told me to flee, yet I was held in place by an unseen force that was a combination of curiosity and dread. My camera was in my bag, I realized. Perhaps someone would believe me if I documented this and provided proof. My hands trembled as I reached for it. The paintings around me trembled, and their expressions distorted as soon as my fingers touched the strap. The eyes of a few passengers widened with fear. Others smiled hideously, their mouths opening wider than the laws of physics permitted. One of the frames whispered, almost inaudibly, "Don't leave yet." My pulse thumping, I turned, and the gallery had changed. The wall had been turned into a hallway. The temperature dropped, and my shirt began to become wet. As though the museum itself had a heartbeat, my footfall reverberated against the unsolid floorboards, occasionally giving way to a damp squelch. The form of the crew member flickered ahead. For a brief moment his uniform was frayed, and beneath the smile, his face was skeleton. He vanished, then came back nearer, always carrying the same tray. As if alive, the liquids appeared to ripple and move. My stomach twisted and my throat dried up. I tried to regain my breath by ducking behind a pedestal. Now the gallery was giggling, or perhaps I was. From every painting there were shadows that followed me around corners and slithered down the floor like tendrils. They were rubbing on my ankles, sticky and cold. Then I heard heavy, purposeful footsteps behind me, but when I turned around, I saw no one. The humming came again, stronger, reverberating through the walls and encircling me. It seemed to be inside my skull. I recalled the security cameras on board the ship. Perhaps someone on the bridge would notice me, or perhaps the crew would. However, when I dashed to a door that said exit, I discovered that the hallway behind me went on forever, with doors multiplying and numbers changing in illogical ways. I staggered into another room and heard the murmur once more, "Join them, it's warmer here." In some ways, it resembled the dining hall, except it was inverted. The ceiling was adorned with chairs. Glasses whirled in the air, tables drifting. From somewhere came a faint, off-key, discordant music box tune. I froze and blinked. A group of travelers sat at a big table in the middle, their faces calm but expressionless. As though to toast, they held up their glasses, and the crew member in the head chair smiled more broadly than before. A small note landed at my feet after fluttering past my shoulder. My heart raced as I saw the words, "Once you drink, the gallery drinks you," written in a hand I didn't recognize. The walls were drawing near. Water splattered across the boards as if the room itself were alive as my camera fell out of my hand and hit the floor with a damp thud. I needed to leave. However, each escape I attempted brought me back to the dining hall, where the smiling crew member was waiting. Then I noticed that I was sitting at that table drinking from the tray in one of the paintings that I had previously disregarded. My image appeared in the picture, staring back with big eyes and a mouth that opened to match the crew member's smile. I ran, following a hallway that got shakier by the second. The hum, the murmurs, and the laughing all converge and around me like bonds. A voice yelled my name from off in the distant. Human. Urgent. It might be a passenger, or it might simply be the gallery playing tricks on me. I had to follow it even if my lungs ached and my legs shook. "You can't leave, not until we're ready." A chill whispered up my neck as I fled, and I could feel my sanity eroding. Every step I took brought me back to the same twisted dining hall, where the crew member's smile remained constant. My pulse was pounding so loudly that it drowned out the faint hum that was vibrating through the walls, and my hands were moist with sweat. I tripped over a soft object. I recognized it as a passenger when I looked down. Pale, with eyes that were glassy and blind, and a sheen of water that I couldn't distinguish. They were grinning, and their hands were shaking as they reached for me. I took a step back and flinched, but then I saw another person, and another. The blank features of dozens of them were frighteningly similar, and they were all silent, save for the slight creak of their clothing. The corridor itself was suddenly fluid, bending and folding like liquid metal, and I realized this as I backed into a corner. The gallery was more than simply a structure. It was a living entity that was changing to fit my needs. The faces in each artwork beckoned me forward, chanting my name as they pulsed. With the amber tray in hand, the crew member emerged from the far end of the hallway. It reflected in the puddles that formed on the bent floor as it blazed brighter. "Just one sip," he remarked in a smooth, melodic voice. I recalled the camera and said, "You'll see everything." Perhaps catching evidence of this would save me, or at least show the world. The reflections in the puddles, however, swirled furiously when I reached down. Before the water burst upward and became spectral hands that grabbed at my arms, my reflection smiled back at me. I shouted and spun away, slamming my foot against a crooked floorboard. I crashed against a wall after sliding across the slippery surface. My flashlight wavered. The hallway briefly expanded into a large ballroom with mirrors on either wall. Every mirror displayed a different image of me, with horrified eyes as I sipped from the crew member's tray. The crew member stepped closer and said, "You can't fight it. The gallery selects its visitors." I dashed once more, squeezing through winding, twisting corridors. Now paintings depicted chambers I had never seen before, stairwells that led nowhere, staterooms drowned in murky water, and empty theaters. Like a predator pursuing its prey, every picture and mirror appeared to anticipate my movements. Then, I noticed it, a cabin door with my name on it. My chamber. There was a wave of relief. The door vanished into a canvas as I dashed to it and pulled the doorknob. Like water, the surface rippled. With the tray in hand, my reflection smiled at me. "Drink, or stay forever," I said as my own mouth opened, and I staggered back into the corridor. Now all surfaces were alive. Underfoot, water gathered and trickled from ceiling vents, collecting in reflections of the passengers and crew members who had disappeared from the decks. They beckoned and urged me with their soulless eyes. Then a human, substantial hand caught my shoulder. I almost got pulled in," a wet, shivering fellow traveler murmured. I had little time to nod before the crew member reappeared, closer than before. The walls were flooded with a terrible brightness as the amber glow grew stronger. At that moment, I understood that escape was no longer a physical one. More than my body, the gallery desired my terror, my focus, and my submission, and it would take me entirely if I didn't fight. I was no longer able to run. The gallery's hum was now deafening, and the passageways had folded in on themselves, whirling like a vortex. The scent of salt and rust was nearly oppressive, and the air was heavy with moisture. Every shadow, painting, and reflection appeared to be reaching out for me, like phantom hands that somehow burned to the touch. The crewman waited ahead. The amber tray glowed brighter than ever as it hung in front of him. His eyes were voids that seemed to engulf the room, and his smile was impossible to contain. Passengers I knew, laughing and pale and drowned, swirled around him like dancers in a ghoulish waltz. I staggered back. I was left in almost total darkness after my flashlight flickered and ultimately died. The floorboards were creaking under the weight of intangible bodies, and I could hear it. The walls were breathing and leaking. I became desperate as I heard a faint murmur that curved around my ears. "Once you see it, you belong." I randomly yanked open a door. It led to the main ballroom, or what was once the ballroom, on board the ship. Water trickled from the swaying chandeliers like gentle rain. The entire area was suddenly lighted by the amber glow of the tray, which reflected off the water puddles to create hideous faces. With a start, I understood that every passenger who had disappeared was actually present, now a part of the gallery, caught in the walls, the water, and the reflections. Their eyes were wide and beseeching, and their mouths opened in mute moans. The member of the team raised the tray. "It's your turn," he muttered. Now, his voice could be heard in every nook and cranny, in every painting, in every reflection. It made my knees give way. The hallway I had come from was gone, but I still wanted to run and fight. The gallery itself engulfed every exit I attempted. As if the ship itself were alive, thriving on terror, I heard my own voice scream, but it was immediately absorbed by the swelled hum. My hands trembled wildly. The tray beckoned to me as it glided toward me. I grabbed for it, and the floor shifted as soon as my fingers touched the amber liquid. Water rushed all around me. Even though I was falling, I avoided hitting the ground. Rather, I found myself floating in the blackness, surrounded by innumerable reflections of the other passengers and myself. Their eyes were vacant, their smiles the same. Then I caught a glimpse of him, my own image, smiling, holding the tray in the same position as the crew member. I attempted to turn aside, but the walls of the gallery obstructed my path. "Drink, stay, belong," I yelled, searching for something tangible as the voices of the captive passengers filled my consciousness in a whispered chorus of dread and joy. The amber liquid swirled like a black mirror as my fingers touched it once more. Then there was quiet, total, oppressive quiet, interrupted only by the gentle trickle of water in the distance. I opened my eyes. The spacecraft appeared to be normal once more. The sound of engines, the subtle conversation of travelers, and the aroma of the ocean. Although everything appeared normal, I knew it wasn't. The gallery waited somewhere far in the rear of the ship, and I sensed it. Always waiting, always watching. I ran to my cottage. The door was locked. The tray floated behind it, the amber liquid gleaming, and my reflection in the mirror smiled broader than it should have. I also realized that it wasn't finished. Story 3. I never imagined that something as basic as footsteps could completely frighten me. But it began like way, slow, persistent pacing in the dark of night outside my cabin door. The sound was too measured to be random, too purposeful to be mistaken for ship creaks. You'll understand why I still can't sleep without a light on after I tell you what transpired following. My name is Ethan, and I went on what was meant to be a stress-free vacation with my fiancée Marissa a few months ago. We decided that a week at sea may help us both, as we had been working ourselves to death, her as a nurse, me in IT. When we initially got on board, the ship was enormous and glistened like a floating city. At first, the unlimited meals, limitless drinks, and nightly live performances were just what we needed. During the first few days, nothing seemed unusual. The first night I heard it, however, came next. After 1:00 a.m., it was. Beside me, Marissa was unconscious, breathing steadily, her face flickering in the dim light from the TV. A small sound interrupted the silence as I was half awake, looking through my phone. Tap, 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 steps. They moved slowly and steadily rather than hurriedly or aimlessly. There is a pacing person directly outside our door. As whoever it was moved on, I recall stopping and waited for the sound to subside. However, it didn't. It simply continued to circle back past my cabin, heel to toe. I assumed it might have been an intoxicated traveler attempting to locate their accommodation. However, that made less sense the longer it continued. Just walking, no talking, no fumbling with keycards. Additionally, the steps slowed, almost stopped, each time they arrived at our door, as if anyone out there was paying attention. I lay motionless, listening with my ears. Even though the ship's hallways are carpeted, I can still feel the vibration of those footsteps on the floor. There came a time when my curiosity won out. Careful not to disturb Marissa, I slipped out of bed and scampered toward the door. I put my eye to the peephole and held my breath. Nothing. There was nobody in the hallway. However, the noise continued. The footsteps were as obvious as day and were perhaps 2 feet away from me. However, no one could be seen through the peephole, only the sterile light from the corridors. Skin tingling, I staggered back from the entrance. A part of me felt silly, but I wanted to wake Marissa. It wasn't going to go over well to tell her, "Hey, babe, there's invisible footsteps outside the cabin." With my heart still pounding, I went back into bed and pulled the covers over my head, acting like a child once more. The steps finally came to a halt. I attempted to persuade myself that it was nothing more than my imagination during the calm hours. However, it occurred again the following evening. Furthermore, it continued past my door this time. It came to a halt at it. The handle suddenly began to rattle. My heart almost stopped as I heard the handle rattling. It was intentional, not merely a bump or a change in the ship's motion, a slow twist. Our door was being attempted to be opened. I jumped up in bed. Marissa woke up next to me, drowsy. "What's the matter?" she muttered. "Shh," I muttered. "There's someone outside." Her eyes widened immediately, and she lost all signs of slumber. She strained to listen as she sat up. The handle shook once more violently, and then there was a slight metallic click, as if someone was playing with the keycard slot. I halted Marissa as she fumbled for her phone to summon security. With my heart thumping in my ears, I growled, "Wait, pay attention." The handle froze. The cabin was filled with dead quiet, which was so oppressive that it made my chest ache. Then, tap, tap, tap. Like whoever, or whatever it was, had all the time in the world. Those identical footsteps were pacing again, but they were slower now, more methodical, and looping back and forth. In a whisper, Marissa said, "Call security." With a trembling palm, I grabbed the cabin phone and rang the front desk. Before a weary male voice responded, the line rang twice. I made an effort to speak steadily. "Yes, someone is outside the door of our cabin. They were experimenting with the handle." "Do you require medical aid, sir?" The man cut in, his voice strangely flat. "No. All I need is for security to patrol the corridor. Someone is out there at the moment." Quiet. He paused for a long time, as if awaiting something. I froze as he said, "There's no one on your floor. You mean there isn't anyone?" "Right now, I can hear them." Marissa's eyes were wide with fear as she gripped my arm. Once more, the footsteps had begun to circle, seemingly taunting us. "Sir, I assure you," the man on the phone continued, mechanically calm. He hung up after saying, "There's no one there." In my ear, the dial tone reverberated. We were both too terrified to even go near the door, so we sat in dumb silence. At last, Marissa muttered, "Tomorrow, we're going out of this cabin." I agreed, but I knew in my heart that it wouldn't be that easy. "I don't care if we have to pay extra." Because the footsteps ceased after a few minutes. There was silence in the corridor. Then there were 3 different knocks on the other side of the door. Not desperate. Not by chance. 3 heavy, slow knocks. I suddenly understood that, whomever they weren't attempting to enter. They were alerting us. They were aware that we were inside. Like gunshots, the 3 knocks reverberated throughout the small cabin. We were both afraid to breathe. I recall waiting for the handle to turn again while clenching my jaw till my teeth ached. However, nothing happened next. Nothing but quiet. My stomach fell when I eventually plucked up the courage to look through the peephole. There was nobody in the hallway. Utterly devoid. However, the carpet didn't appear right, as if someone had been standing there for a long time, shifting their weight from foot to foot. Faint indentations followed directly beyond our door. Marissa shuddered and shook her head. "I can't remain here." I couldn't. I didn't protest. Together, we threw on our clothes and rushed out of the cottage. The overhead lights were softly buzzing in the dim hallway. We looked over our shoulders the entire time as we half jogged to the elevators. The hallway appeared abnormally long, as if the exit would never seem to come closer, regardless of how many doors we passed. We eventually arrived at the glass elevator and pressed the button. The doors opened very slowly as it chimed. We entered, and I pressed "Lobby." The elevator hummed, but I saw something in the glass walls, reflection before it moved. Behind us, a number, pale, hazy at the edges, as if out of focus. It stood in the corridor immediately outside the elevator rather than inside. It was staring directly at us with its head tilted strangely. With a gasp, Marissa grabbed my arm before the door shut. The elevator shook as it went down. We were both trembling by the time we got to the main deck. We headed straight toward the desk of guest services. Unimpressed by our panic, the middle-aged night cashier, who had heavy circles under her eyes, looked up. I blurted out, "There was someone outside our cabin." They gave the handle a try. They rapped. The man simply hung up when we called earlier. The woman gave me a weird, worn-out look as if she had heard it before. She leaned forward slowly and murmured, "Which cabin?" I informed her. Her gaze shifted to a close coworker and then returned to us. "I'll put a note in the file," she stated bluntly. "Aim for some sleep." "That's all?" I yelled. "You won't dispatch security?" She pinched her lips thin. "Security will not discover anything. They never do." Her tone wasn't one of contempt. It was resigned, as though she was already aware of what we had witnessed, and it wasn't the first time. "And what do you mean by that?" Marissa whispered. The clerk's eyes grew stony. "Have fun on your cruise. Avoid exploring the hallways after dark." She leaned closer, her voice barely audible, and said, "And whatever you do." She straightened up, put on a customer service grin, and shouted out to the next person in line as though we weren't even there, "Don't open the door if it knocks again." My knees started to weaken. Too scared to talk, we staggered away from the desk. I was eager to be back on dry soil for the first time since boarding. And yet, somewhere behind us, following patiently as ever, I swear I heard it again as we turned into the main corridor. Tap, tap, tap. It was impossible to sleep. I couldn't get rid of the impression that something had followed us down, even after I left the front desk and wandered aimlessly into the atrium, which was adorned with glistening chandeliers and inebriated patrons staggering from the midnight buffet. That indistinct figure, that creature. I wound up in the ship's library with Marissa. With only a few weary visitors feigning to read periodicals, it was largely empty. I believe that all we both needed was some privacy and a place to contemplate. We encountered him there, an elderly man with a half-empty Scotch glass sitting in the corner. He was deeply tanned, his white hair was brushed back, and he exuded a presence that commanded attention even without his words. He waved us over when he saw us hovering anxiously by the door. "First cruise?" he inquired. Hesitantly, we sat. "Yes," I said. "Why?" He looked at us with an odd sense of sympathy. "You haven't missed it, have you?" My face was emptied of blood. In a whisper, Marissa said, "Seen." "What?" The man nodded slowly, as if he had verified something. He lowered his voice and leaned forward. "Not all cabins are created equal. Some are older, even following remodeling. The ship includes a mechanism for enclosing some memories. Your cabin, I suppose. Numbers in the 400s, port side, E-deck?" A chill went down my spine. He had done it perfectly. He let out a sigh. "A man passed away in that room years ago, before either of you were ever born. He barricaded himself inside during a storm, according to the crew. Days later, they located him, but the ship continued to sail. How no one noticed is beyond explanation. The same thing has been reported by visitors ever since. It knocks. Steps. There was a waiting figure in the corridor. Marissa's fingers gripped mine so tightly that it hurt, but most people don't survive a week before pleading to be moved. "How come the cruise line doesn't shut it down?" The man gave a sour laugh. "They would have to shut down half the ship if they closed off just one stateroom. Furthermore, the majority of people remain silent. Too ashamed. They blame it on a terrible dream, too much drink, or anxiety." I wanted to fight and demand proof, but I could still feel the afterimage of that fuzzy figure etched into my vision. You'd be surprised what people will ignore on vacation. I had a dry throat. "If you answer the knock, what will happen?" The man's assured mask wavered for the first time. He turned his head away. "You don't." We sat silently for a while. The clock in the library ticked away. Waves smashed on the side of the ship somewhere above us, making it creak. I agreed with Marissa when she finally murmured, "We're not going back to that room." However, the cruise was completely booked. All of the cabins are present. There was nowhere else for us to go. As we eventually left the library, I couldn't help but look down the corridor that led to our deck. It seemed darker than it ought to have been, like a tunnel that was ready to engulf us. And I thought I heard it again in that quiet, intentional yet faint. There are 3 knocks, stable but distant, as if it were becoming impatient. We made every effort to stay away from returning. Until the majority of the guests vanished into their rooms, we stayed in the atrium. Despite the cold, salty breeze that pricked our eyes, we sat outside on the deck. We strolled through the hallways, wasting time as though the night would just vanish and let us free. Eventually, however, there was nowhere to hide. The ship was silent. The sound of music, laughter, and sandals scuffing on tile has vanished. The only sound echoing through my legs like a heartbeat was the constant buzz of motors beneath the floor. The corridor had changed appearance by the time we arrived at our deck. Shadows stretched deeper than they should have, and the lights appeared lower, nearly faded. Even though it hadn't been wet before, the carpet gave a slight squeak beneath my shoes. "We shouldn't go inside." Marissa continued to whisper. We shouldn't re-enter, but we had no choice but to use our room key. We were unable to sleep in the corridor. I inserted the card into the lock. There was a blinking green light. There was a gentle click as the door opened. The room appeared typical. The TV was dimly illuminated by the ship's channel, the bed was down, and the bathroom door was open. However, the air felt heavy and humid, as if the weight of the sea had forced its way in. Marissa's hands were shaking in her lap as she perched on the edge of the bed. She said, "Let's just stay awake." I nodded, but I didn't think it was true. If we don't sleep, nothing can happen. At precisely 3:12 a.m. it began. There are 3 knocks. It was scarcely imaginable how soft it was. There was a soft tapping coming from inside the wall, exactly where the cabin divider and headboard connected. We stopped. We didn't both breathe. Then one more. More volume. There are 3 knocks. "It's the pipes," I muttered. "Just the pipes," I answered, but I knew already. Pipes didn't stop. Pipes struck again without waiting for a pause. My arm was pierced by Marissa's nails. Her eyes were gleaming and big. "Don't respond to it," she muttered. It came from the door the 3rd time. Deliberate, incisive, and clear. There are 3 knocks. I was immobile. A part of me wanted to think it was a drunk guest, a prank, something. However, the hallway outside had been deserted. Additionally, the sound wasn't correct. On wood, it wasn't flesh. It sounded deep and hollow, as if there were a knock coming from within the door. Marissa began to sob quietly while repeatedly shaking her head. "Don't open it, please," she pleaded. There was a long pause. The strain of listening so intently caused my ears to ring. Perhaps, I reasoned, whatever it was had given up and it was done. The handle then turned. Slow. As the lever pressed down by itself, metal ground gently. Just as the door rattled, I jumped up and pushed the security latch over. The gap opened a few inches, enough for me to see, but the chain remained in place, enough to make me regret ever having it. A face, waterlogged but not crisp or clear, like something crushed against glass underwater. Features become blurry, pale skin, unblinking, wide eyes, and an open mouth that seems to be yearning for air. The chamber was filled with the stench of rot and salt. "Give me access," it muttered. The lips did not move, though. The sound reverberated through the floor, throughout the walls, and inside my skull. The latch bent when the door trembled violently. Marissa let out a shriek. With sweaty palms, I struggled to keep it closed as I banged my shoulder against it. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, there was silence. The handle became motionless. The distance shrank. The chain ceased to tremble. For what seemed like hours, we stood still. The room appeared normal after daylight eventually filtered through the thin curtains. However, there were 3 deep gouges on the inside of the door that were as obvious as if they had been cut with a knife. Right down. Parallel. After reporting it, we pleaded once more for a different room. The employees gave a tight smile, regretful, but unconvinced. "Fully booked," they said once again. For the remainder of the cruise, we didn't sleep. We avoided being in that room when the knocking resumed by staying in public areas and exploring the decks till morning. It never seemed so surreal to tread onto solid ground when we eventually departed. I vowed that we would never go on another cruise. However, weeks later, I still occasionally hear it. When the walls settle at night and the house is quiet, there are 3 knocks, and I am aware that it is not done with us, no matter where it is. Story 4. When the ship's photographer passes by, you don't really notice. They can be seen skulking on the deck to take pictures of families against the horizon, catching couples mid-laugh, or floating across dining tables. They are there to create memories. That's what I thought, anyway. Until I saw myself standing next to a man who I know has been deceased for years in a picture I never posed for. Eric is my name. To get over a terrible year, my younger sister Natalie and I went on this vacation. She had recently gone through a difficult divorce, and I had lost my 8-year employment. We didn't usually plan opulent trips, but when Natalie discovered a last-minute offer, we thought, why not? A week at sea with no obligations and cocktails in hand. A restart. That reset was exactly how the first night felt. A bottle of wine, dinner in the shimmering dining hall, and the ship's photographer navigating tables while wearing a camera strap around his neck. In contrast to the rest, he was tall, skinny, and oddly silent. No trite jokes, no huge smile. He nodded courteously, then raised the lens and clicked away. It wasn't until the next morning that I gave him another thought. Natalie and I walked by the photo station, where prints from the previous evening were on display. She pointed out one of us mid-toast while giggling and pulling my arm. However, I instantly glanced to the shot's corner. I had a person standing right behind me, not hazy when moving. The background is not half caught. His hand was on the back of my chair and he was there, clearly visible. A dark-suited man with pale complexion and a tiny smile tugging at his lips. I went cold, since I recognized that face. Robert Hale was the one. My former neighbor. 5 years had passed since his death. I had trouble breathing for a while. Perhaps it was a look-alike, I thought. Thousands of people were transported by ships, and accidents occurred. It wasn't right, though, the way he glanced at the camera and peered straight into it. Natalie believed that I was exaggerating. She dismissed it with a wave, saying, "It's just some guy. Avoid being overly anxious. This is what you usually do." But the more I looked at that picture, the more incorrect it seemed to me. I think the photographer grinned when I looked up to see him at the far end of the gallery, watching me with the camera dangling from his neck like a lifeless weight. It was the first time I considered the possibility that the pictures weren't intended to preserve memories. They might have been displaying something else. And my blood froze as we looked at the prints from the second day. Because Robert was no longer only in my photos. He was with everyone. The photo exhibition from the second day was brightly lighted and had 100 happy faces captured in a moment, much like any other tourist setting. But the light on my chest went out when I looked closely. He was back. Robert. My deceased neighbor. He wasn't in the background this time. With one arm casually slung behind the father's chair, he was seated at the dinner table with a family of 4. The family appeared content, unaware, and in the middle of laughing. But there he was, his eyes too keen, his face as white as chalk. With my heart racing, I walked down the line of prints. Robert appears to be among a group of college students in another picture, leaning on the railing. Another, with their hands courteously clasped in front of him, stands in the rear of a beautiful portrait of a couple. Always understandable, never moving, peering through the lens all the time. It was only when Natalie gripped my wrist that I realized I was murmuring, "Eric, you're frightening, folks." I saw it as I hovered, shaky, in front of the pictures, other people looking at me uncomfortably. However, nobody else appeared to notice him. I muttered, "Nat," and drew her in. "Are you able to spot him?" "That's right. Look there." She squinted as she leaned forward. Her face changed. I briefly believed she had finally noticed. Then, bewildered, she withdrew. "No one is there, Eric. You and the families are alone. Are you trying to trick me?" I sensed the slant of the floor. As though I had been thrown overboard, my stomach roiled. How could she not see him when he was standing there? The photographer reappeared. Quiet. Never a word. His camera swayed as he moved slowly across the gallery. Our eyes met as he walked by me. The camera never raised, but I swear I heard the slight click of his shutter. I had trouble sleeping that night. Under our cabin lamp, I stared at the first day's snapshot until my vision became blurry. Like he belonged there, Robert's hand was resting on my chair. As if he had always been there. I heard it at about 2 in the morning. There was a faint scratching noise outside the door of our cabin. Then there was the sound of paper rustling beneath. With my heart pounding, I sat up and discovered a picture on the carpet. I was the one, alone in the ship's dimly lit corridor. My lips were open and my eyes were wide, as if I had just gasped. Impossibly close behind me was Robert. His hand reached for my shoulder as his head cocked and his smile became brighter. Never did I pose for it. That hallway was never even where I stood. But there it was, waiting for me in the middle of the night. Printed, shiny. And I believed I saw the shadow of a tall, slender person walking away when I turned to face the entrance again. The photographer. Natalie was not awakened by me. I just sat there with the lamp next to me buzzing softly and that picture shaking in my hands. My gut told me to tear it up, but I refrained, for if I destroyed it, what if Robert, or whatever he was, would no longer simply be present? How about if he came out? In the morning, I believed I might have had a hallucination. Stress, excessive alcohol consumption, and shiprocking could have all affected me. Then Natalie discovered it on the bedside table. She held it up and frowned, asking, "What is this?" "Set it down." My voice broke. "Please, just put it down, Nat." She gave a tense laugh. "It is an image of you. Where did you go last night when you wandered off?" I felt sick to my stomach. She failed to notice him, not Robert. The hand that is going to clamp down on my shoulder is not it. Only me. By themselves. I quickly grabbed the picture and stuffed it in my purse. I remained where I was. Simply said, "Forget about it." But I was unable to forget. We attended another ship function later that day. In order to prevent the trip from going awry, Natalie was determined to enjoy herself. On the main deck, there was a masquerade party with dancing people and music that spilled over the water. I briefly believed that it might be all right up until the photographer showed up again. Without saying a word, he moved between the dancers while the camera flashed. When the lens was aimed at them, people grinned, but they didn't seem to notice how he was always close to me. Like he was relishing the suspense, he would raise the camera, pause, and then lower it once more. I was nudged by Natalie. "You're staring at the poor guy once more. You must stop." "What a jerk," I growled. "He's not." I bit it back though. Everyone was taking selfies, clinking drinks, and laughing. I sounded crazy. I couldn't enjoy it though. All night long, I followed his every move with my gaze. And when Natalie wasn't looking, I swear I saw him tilt the camera in her direction multiple times. Another picture was beneath our door the following morning. My blood froze at this one. Natalie was the one, not grinning, not giggling. Her party mask was falling off her face as she stood rigidly in the corridor. Robert was back behind her, but he was getting closer. Too near. His hand was only an inch away from her throat. I also noticed something else in the frame for the first time. The photographer's dim reflection in a wall mirror. He was grinning. The pictures were a game, not just pictures. An arrangement. Natalie had recently joined it. I was no longer able to hide it from Natalie. She took the picture from me as soon as she noticed that I was holding it with a face as pale as chalk. She initially shook her head and laughed. "This once more? You must quit worrying so much about yourself." Her smile wavered though. Her brows narrowed at the small silhouette behind her shoulder as she leaned closer to the picture. "That's..." She paused, nearly muttering. "Doesn't that sound like a man? Last night he was absent. My face was emptied of blood. Now she could see him." The ship's phone in our cabin rang as soon as she said it. Suddenly, sharply, we both jumped. The only sound I heard when I took it up was the quiet buzz of a film reel spinning, like to an ancient projector in a deserted theater. Then there was a click. Quiet. I smashed it down. It felt like my chest was about to give out. "To the staff," Natalie stated resolutely. "We'll track him down. This is no longer amusing." We rushed to the photo gallery, where framed images of smiling people and sunny beaches adorned the walls. However, the counter was empty. No attendant, no employees. Only rows of drawers with printed photo envelopes within. I pulled a drawer open. Hundreds of pictures were released. And there he was, in almost all of them, Robert. Sometimes in plain view, sometimes in fuzz. Always observing, always behind someone. I looked at one photo after another. Couples, children, families, and that same pallid figure slid into the corners like an unseen stain. Pointing to a wall in the rear of the gallery, Natalie took hold of my arm. There were dozens of larger prints mounted. However, these were not the joyful photos that were for sale. These were distinct. Every lithograph depicted terrified passengers. Mouths open, eyes wide, hands groping for the lens. And Robert was in all of them, retaining them. He tightened his hold on their throats, shoulders, and arms. Natalie stretched out and stroked the corner of one with trembling fingers. Is it true that these individuals are no longer aboard the ship? I started to respond, but before I could do so, I saw that the hair on the back of my neck stood up. In the doorway stood the photographer. He had a camera dangling from his neck. His face was etched with a smile. He remained silent. I just lifted the camera and prepared the flash. It dawned on me then that he wasn't actually documenting recollections. He was gathering souls. A subtle, flickering hum pervaded everything as the gallery lights buzzed overhead. I could feel Natalie's nails cutting into my flesh as she held my palm so tightly. The photographer didn't move quickly. Instead, he stayed there patiently and calmly, as if he knew we had nowhere to go. Above the shutter button, his finger lingered. I muttered, "Natalie, don't look at him." However, she was all ready. Her breath was shallow and harsh, and her chest heaved. He briefly dropped the camera and cocked his head, seemingly amused, as though choosing which of us to capture first. I dragged her along with me as I staggered back toward the door. However, the door remained in place when I pulled the handle. It was secured. Inside, we were sealed. "What are you doing?" With a cracked voice, I yelled. "Who are you?" At last, the photographer spoke in a controlled, gentle tone akin to a eulogy. "Not by whom." "What?" "I'm a witness. Every journey requires one. I, like the water, never forget anything." Once more, he raised the camera. The flash burst. Everything became white for a moment. Natalie was gone by the time my eyesight cleared. My throat shut. I whirled around. "Natalie! Natalie!" Then I caught sight of her. On the wall, not in the room. In one of the pictures. Her fists were pressed against imaginary glass. Her eyes were fixed in fear, and her mouth was open in a silent scream. Robert was standing behind her, his arm wrapped around her like if they had known each other for ages, grinning that strange smile. I stumbled forward and brushed my palm across the shiny print. I could see her face following me. She wasn't merely in the photo, it held her captive. The photographer moved in closer and lowered the camera until my face was only a few inches from the lens. He muttered, "It's easier if you don't fight. The camera only captures what is already in the sea." With my breath breathless and my heart pounding, I retreated against the wall. Then it dawned on him, his own image. The gallery's mirrors displayed me, the lighting and the frames, but not him. He didn't even cast a reflection. It was only the camera. I took the only possible action. I sprang forward and wrenched the camera free by grabbing the strap around his neck. His screech was hollow and metallic, like rust scraping across steel, but it was a cry of wrath rather than fear. The pictures on the wall trembled. The exhibition was filled with muted cries as dozens of faces pressed forward, palms slapping against the slick surfaces. I threw the camera on the ground. It remained intact. It didn't break at all. It hummed softly, as if it were alive, and simply rolled. The photographer jumped in head first. I took Natalie's picture off the wall and held it close to my chest. I swear for a moment that I felt warm motion, as if she was still engaged in combat. The lights went off, and the flash went out again in the darkness.